Okay, we are now recording. Welcome everyone to the May 5th weekly Principals Committee of the GitOps Working Group. 1900 GMT every week from now on. I'm Scott Rigby, nice to meet you. I am just now dropping in the link to the notes if folks can help fill out the attendees list. And we have an agenda. We also, given that it is an agenda that's in progress, if people have other agenda items, please add them to the bottom of the agenda. If something's really pressing, please let us know and we can help prioritize those agenda items. Thanks.
Where is the agenda here? Because I've got something going from the 13th of May to the 15th of April, but there's nothing in between.
If you have it show you the what's it called, the document outline. There's 3 groupings. You are looking at the working group monthly. You have to scroll down to the principals committee.
Thank you very much. Apologies.
Right. No worries.
Not at all. Thanks, Leonardo. And also, I should note that that has changed for Reese and anyone else watching the recording, and the other 3 people on the call too. Yeah. So please, just do what Leonardo said. There's the working group monthly, principals committee, and GitOps committee. It's also the same outline now that's in the meetings .md file in the root of the GitOps working group repo. There is a PR open that I just opened to update our meetings for this week. I must say that I'm tempted to suggest moving that off so we don't have to do a PR for every single meeting. But for now, people seem to like it. We can always revisit. Okay. So the first topic is sticking to plan. The goal is to, Brice or I will open the HackMD doc. Want me to do that, Brice?
Yes, please.
Okay, I have it open now, so I know you did it last time. I'll change from from owners to signed-in users. So we're back to how we were for each meeting. Does somebody else want to give a recap on where they think we were from the last meeting? If not, I'm happy to. Any takers?
I can give you kind of, from my perspective, we had reached a certain level of consensus with the 4th principle. We skipped talking about the 3rd principle, which had an open discussion in GitHub. I believe we had determined that we would post the 4th principle for open discussion to settle on this call. Is that correct?
Yeah,
that wasn't matches. Item. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Brice.
That roughly matches my recollection. Yeah.
And yeah, that's it. And I'm guessing the objective for today is to finalize the 4th principle and clearly understand what must be completed with all principles before we can have version 0.1 published.
I think so too. And we didn't discuss exactly Semver yet, but okay, we're now moving to hands because Moshe has raised
I'm happy to not skip hands because we're small, either way. But I think we perhaps need to discuss principle number 5, and whether this is part of principle number 4 or not is that of governance through Git. And I think probably a good example of this is a Heroku style model of deployment considered GitOps. And if I'm pushing straight to master without a pull request and any type of merge blocking test enabled, is that considered GitOps? So
thanks,
I don't know.
I'm going to drop the link to your discussion into just to help. Okay. What I didn't want to interrupt you if you weren't finished just then, Moshe.
No, so I wanted to really just add that to the agenda. So
Okay. Do you mind putting it on the agenda in the Google Doc, or would you like someone else to do that? Are you in a place to be able to do that?
No, I can do that.
Okay, great. Okay. Oh, it looks like you lowered your hand, Reese. Is that on purpose?
Yeah, I mean, like if we're just going to add it to the agenda, and we'll get to that anyway. I think that there's a discussion to be had around governance through Git, and I think that's something that you and I, Scott, spent a lot of time actually thinking about. Like this, what is the scope of GitOps, right? And where do we stop? Where does that scope stop? So I think that's something that it's not the like. We'll get to that. We'll get to the discussion.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks. Leon, welcome, Robert, and Leonardo.
Just a very quick comment that in terms of scope of GitOps and implementation versus principles, I think the principles should be tool agnostic. We always talk about state as just as a concept. So anything that talks about Git or pull requests or anything, even like pull requests is not even tool agnostic, it's provider agnostic, it's GitHub agnostic. I mean, GitHub specific. Anything that talks in those terms, I would very much steer away from when defining the principles.
Okay, cool. And I'm going to thank you. I just want to suggest that I'm going to take that and encapsulate it and bring it into when we do discuss it. Maybe you can raise it again, or we can think about it. Okay, welcome, Cornelia.
Sorry to be late.
All good. I'm surprised anyone can make it even close to on time this week. It's an very insane week. Okay, so I'm going to drop the link to the notes again here for a few folks that just joined, and that's for this week. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to the HackMD doc. Would you like me to share my screen? Would that be helpful to anyone on the call?
Yes, please, especially if we're recording it. It'll be helpful for the recording if anybody watches that.
And that's a smart idea. Okay. Yes, and if that was not done in past weeks, apologies retroactively. Okay. So just to be clear with everyone, this is where we're at with the meeting notes. Should definitely add Mosh to the doc. Okay, great. So so I believe we just covered that we're going to make sure that item 4 is refined in whatever way that we felt that we needed. One note that it is that the last week, I'm just going to skip to, sorry, let me blow this up a little bit. Is that better?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, last week we had an action item that wording viewpoints were to be added to GitHub discussions for asynchronous communication as we work towards broad consensus, not unanimity specifically, for the first pre-release of the revised principles. I believe the only person to have added a point was to the discussion so far that I could see anyway was Moshe, not for item 4, but for a proposed additional item that we now have on the agenda to discuss. So we can discuss it now, though. We're not prevented from discussing it, and we really should. So if anyone has any thoughts to start, this is what we said we were going to leave off with, is to be discussed in principle 4. Let me blow this up a little bit. Is that good?
Yep, it's readable.
Okay. These were the items to be discussed. I'll read it out loud. Human/machines and desired state. Those were the very shorthand notes from folks who wanted to discuss things related to 4 from last week.
So I think so. If it's all right, I'm kind of jumping the gun, but I'll discuss human machines, since I'm the one who edited it in the first place, way back when. So the idea here is that explicitly is to and it's not necessary, right? I think it's as mentioned last week, this is not a necessary addition, but the idea here is to make sure that we explicitly capture a common omission or misunderstanding about these, which is that they should apply both to human operators and I don't mean operators in the Kubernetes sense. I mean people who operate on systems, and to system operators, right? Systems who operate on systems, and that both of those should act in the same way. And I think that can be very well handled in the explanatory notes, and they don't necessarily need to make the distinction in the principle, but that's their intended, that's the purpose of them being there in the first place, is because there was a kind of a misunderstanding around what does it look like when systems manage systems versus human managed systems, and how the principles apply. I yield to Robert.
Yeah, thanks.
I think I mentioned it at the end of last meeting that I feel that going back and talking about the human readable versus machine readable in the fourth principle is kind of redundant, as it is already brought up in the first principle, which, you know, everything builds up to this point, right? So we're starting off right away talking about how it should be both machine and human readable. So I feel like going back to that again would be kind of be redundant. That's it.
I was just going to add here that I really like the way these are written now. They're very succinct, very clear, I think.
Yeah, short and precise, and then we can, you know, deep dive later on. But as principles, they should probably be a little more, you know, short and concise, and, you know, just encapsulate the thing straight off, not be wordy.
Yep,
wordy.
I just realized I cannot raise my hand while in presentation mode somehow.
Well, then you can just yell.
I will just, I'll speak softly, but I'll, yeah, don't let me overrun anything, as always. My question, it's not really a point of view, it's more of a moderation question. Do we feel, okay, what would our criteria be for points that we think are very important to not fit within the either the paragraph explanation, the single paragraph explanation of each of the principles, or the expanded notes that would be below each principles, where there would be a number of points that are valuable enough to mention, or not mention, valuable enough to, be combined, but not valuable enough to be important to be memorizable when folks are presenting these principles just in short form. And I say that only because there are now, I believe there are 4 items on the list to discuss. For principle 4, we've discussed humans and machines, and I got the feeling, Reese, that you kind of yielded to that.
I don't mind. I like, as I said, I really don't mind. I think it's a point worth making, because in practice I found it relevant. But I have no stake in whether it ends up in the short paragraph or not. I wouldn't feel bad or good either way.
Yeah, I'm going to just add it.
So I like the suggestion of the very short principles, and then have a later discussion section where things can be expanded on.
Okay, I believe Leonardo was next, and then Cornelia.
Is your question, Scott, what is the criteria that we should use to understand whether something fits in the principle description and whether something does not and should be expanded elsewhere? Is that an accurate understanding of what you brought up?
Yes, but I was trying to be, just to be clear, I was trying to be very deliberate about what, not just in an abstract sense.
Okay.
But yes, I think we could apply that some criteria, but I don't necessarily want to devise a law for something that is only once and done. It's more that would, but if that makes sense. And I'm actually just about to write down, I know Cornelia's next, so just to clarify my question, what I was about to write down is the other open discussion items that I'm aware of. And if someone disagrees with them, please let me know. I'm just going to go ahead and take the liberty to write them down because I think we all know what they are. Did you have more to say, Leonardo, there? Or
No, that was just my question. And if that was actually the intent, I think we want to keep the principle to the absolute indispensable to understand the underlying concept and nothing else. And anything that has to do with edge cases, use cases, implementation specific tools, and otherwise should, as much as it might provide further clarity, should not be in the principle, but elsewhere. That's what I would summarize my decision criteria to be. That's it. Yield.
Okay, thank you. Cornelia?
Yeah, so I'm stepping back, I think I'm popping the stack, if you will. This conversation around, when Brees was talking about it, I was totally with you, Brees, is that the principle 4, which says, okay, the only way to do operations is by following these principles, and that applies to humans and machines alike. Awesome, totally on board with that. And then Robert, you said something about machine and human readable. And to me, the readability is orthogonal from the point that Brees was making. In fact, it's almost at a little different level of granularity. And so I also don't see, maybe the human readable thing is in the more detailed notes, but I don't see it in the short description either. So I just wanted to make the point that we were talking about humans and machines, but in 2 different axes, if you will.
Yeah, just to clarify, without overstepping, what I just mean is the short text of the 4th principle says that it should only be intentionally operated on through these principles, and these principles already are talking about how to have human readable code as well as machine readable code, which by then I mean it's implied. We don't need to bring that up again.
Okay, so we don't have to say anything else. But it's human. See, but that means that I think that we may want to bring it up again, because again, it's not the human or machine readable. It is that when we interact with the system, and it's not just reading, it's also applying changes to the system. Whether you're a machine or a human, you follow these same principles. So just because I've got some automation doesn't mean that I can go through a back door. I have to follow the same principles. So it's not just a readability question.
Yeah, right. But I also mean that the 4th principle takes in 1, 2, and 3. So all of these things are kind of implied by going through those principles. You know, it's machines or agents should read, and we're trying to continuous state reconciliation. Everything like that is, pave the way for principle 4, which says these 3 principles are the only things. Those are the ways you intentionally should change the system, which by then I mean all of these things are implied through those principles. So if something is unclear up until that point, we need to be more clear in the previous principles, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yep. So you're not objecting to principle 4 at all?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Brees.
Yeah, I think like so I'll back Cornelia with my intent when I said this, like readability, writability, that's an observation, but that doesn't necessarily, something being read and write by machines and humans doesn't imply that you must operate on it by machine and human. That's not the logical set is distinct. However, I think as Robert said, that is implicit, right? It's a implicit versus explicit thing. I think it's absolutely implicit that machines and humans should operate in the same way, because we don't really make the distinction anywhere else. It's like we say about operating, so that includes all operations. Like I think it's fine to not include it in the short text. I want to make a kind of a general point about the explanatory note. I think this is a very Anglo and American centric point, but I can see like the stuff that comes after, like the explanatory note being like the Federalist Papers to the kind of the Constitution, right? It's like it's a set of additional document that bolster and kind of clarify and link together various pieces. And that can be done over a small period of time, and we can concentrate on one of those topics in some depth for a short essay or a short statement about that topic. And I think that would probably be quite useful as to kind of what's the word, to grow without modifying the core of the principles, right? We're growing our understanding on top of it, so it's open to extension but not modification. So it's kind of adding discussions about what happens, in what circumstances can you break glass, in what circumstances can you should you what's the level of pragmatism that you want to apply to this. Like, I think those the explanatory notes can kind of slowly build into a corpus of GitOps knowledge rather than be seen as a kind of a fixed document the way the principles are. Sorry, that was quite long-winded, but
I'm just taking a note on that, Reese. Thank you. And no one had their hand raised after that, but still, it wasn't too long-winded. It was actually 2 minutes. Perfect. I'm just making a quick note that principles notes could, simply refer to under what circumstances, right?
Yeah, and specifically, I think there are like I think the case of break glass, right? How do you operate in an emergency? And that comes up in pretty much all discussions I've had with kind of in-depth discussion of GitOps, is what happens when something goes wrong, right? And there's also the aspect of there's a lower turtle. I keep using that term, but it's the idea that at some level of the stack, you can't bootstrap GitOps with GitOps, right? So it's possible to kind of self-host GitOps, so that you set up a cluster manually, then you from that cluster or from that system set up another system that does the GitOps management, and then you kind of substitute the first system by a GitOps managed system. But nobody does that, and nor should you, right? There's going to be a lower layer or level where you're manually sending stuff imperatively somewhere. And I think like that's worth discussing to make sure that like there's an understanding that at some level, it doesn't matter kind of how sophisticated your approach is, there's some layer at which you can't apply the approach because you need to set up the system that does GitOps, right? And so having a explicit discussion about that, about the bootstrapping of GitOps might be a worthy topic of discussion as well around that.
Do a manual hand again, because I can't do the hand here. I also don't want to jump the gun back to 3 before we know we're done with 4, but I just wanted to note that, for instance, the important point that Moshe brought up about the impossibility of instantaneity it kind of is also one of those other exceptions. And when we get to that discussion, I would just propose that that's a very good use for the notes. And I think we should also keep the notes not short, but not have hundreds of them, but just simply the things that were brought up that people feel are very important, but they weren't important. They're not critical enough to reduce the general understandability of the one line of the principle, nor do they need to be repeated in the one paragraph explanation, but they're satisfactory for the notes. So, and by the way, we might want to suggest that we have conditions like that these not be footnotes. They're not 8-point font way down at the bottom of something, but very, very clearly and prominently displayed with the other principles in the principles document. That would be my proposal anyway.
Yeah, I can totally see the document itself having, if somebody wants to propose a note, and we have under the principles, we have, explanatory note, note 1, title of the note, and then a link to that note, or the note in embodied there to kind of go through that particular item. I mean, we've kind of very quickly talked about 3 now. I can identify 3 things, right? Like instantaneity, Git bootstrapping, and breaking glass. So I think those are like worthy topics of kind of discussion. and there are a bunch more, and we can certainly mine some of the previous discussion and documents around GitOps, because I think we Scott and I spent quite a bit of time, and so did Cornelia, thinking about, what does that actually mean? What does the principles? How do those principles actually apply? And what are the pragmatic, the real world consequences? So there's a fair amount of prior art that we can reuse here.
I think we probably could write entire books on the subject around these things, which I just read the little book of Ikigai, which have 5 pillars or whatever it is. And it's an entire book. So, but coming back again, it's these kind of short principles or short, like these are the pillars. And it's the same thing here. If we keep this short and like short and to the point, we can then obviously riff on that and talk about a lot of things surrounding these principles that might not be directly clear, but we can't put everything into these, and then it would be entire articles per principle, and that won't work. We need to be short and concise, and then we can explain that a little bit more later on, or in different sections, or in different articles, or in different books, whatever.
Right. I mean, I'm sorry to interject, but you're spot on. It's different articles. It's a series of blog posts. It's a series. This is the work of the working group, is that we write blog posts, we put together demonstrations, we record videos, we do conference talks. We don't finish the principles and wash your hands and go for it. We're going to have to keep explaining them. So I love that.
There's at least 4 talks here, at least, and so on and so forth. So if you just keep these principles at least short and concise and easy to remember, then we can build on that. I think it's good.
Great. Sorry, I was just replying to someone who wanted to join this meeting that was confused about the Google Doc. I think we might need to put an outline at the top as opposed to relying on Google's outline. And if so, that would be my mistake, because I did reorganize it. So sorry about that, to interrupt if I did. Did you have more to say on that, Robert, or was that a natural? Okay. Great. Okay.
At this point, I talk for a week, so I could probably talk on, but I'll
I wasn't counting the minutes on that one, but it seemed pretty okay. All right. Well, then in that case, just going back to the agenda, if no one has an objection to the short and memorable version of number 4, then I think we should just say it again. These are a work in progress. We are talking about the pre-release of these, not a final, even a full release of these. So it sounds like we're good. I believe, can people can we catch up here on the items to be discussed? I wrote maybe 2 extensive notes on to be discussed for all the principles, just what we had all just said. And if someone thinks that should be different, please say so, or just go ahead and edit it. Or also please say so if you do edit it. I'm pointing out the fact because I did. And there are 3 other discussion items. I think number 4, it looks like we had one more item that someone wanted to discuss, was about desired state. I do not know who that was. We could go back and look at the recording, but I don't think we're going to do that now. Does anyone on the call have a really burning desire to discuss desired state as a note?
I think the desired state part was to change that the only mechanism through which systems can be to point that towards the only way desired state can be changed is through, or something to that effect.
I think actually that does trigger my memory. I believe you're right. And the suggestion was we had discussed so many different ways to describe number 4. And at the very end, it seemed that through these principles was something that everyone seemed to be generally on board with. Like, wow, you're right. We don't really have to summarize the principles again after we've just said them. And they are in order. So, okay, for now, I'm going to cross that out. And I believe the next item on the list if we want to, I'm not sure which should go in order, but the next item on the list, I believe, is to circle back to Moshe's point that was brought up in, well, I guess discussed for 2 full weeks pretty much. However, also taken into GitHub discussion, and there have been some various viewpoints expressed. Moshe, do you want to do that, or before you do, I just want to ask if you are in theory fundamentally opposed to the idea of making those points that you made in the notes of Principle 3. And I'm only asking that because I believe that we already have broad consensus that that is not only appropriate, but a good idea. Are you still feeling that it's important to revise the wording at this point of the 1-line or the 1-paragraph version of Principle 3? And over to you, Moshe.
So I'm still very strongly opposed to this word of continuous, because it's not continuous. It's a loop, and like I keep coming back to the dictionary definition of continuous without interruption or at a constant rate, and that isn't what GitOps is, and state reconciliation is not a continuous thing. It needs to allow those interruptions and changes in ebb and flow, and continuous implies that what I commit gets deployed instantly, irrelevant of whatever happens, and I don't think that's a pragmatic or practical approach.
So I think this might just be a language thing, right? But for me, the notion of immediacy and continuity are different. They're not the same, and there's no implication of immediacy in continuous. So saying continuous doesn't. Sorry, I did speak out of turn, but like it doesn't imply immediacy. It doesn't. It does very much imply that this is happening all the time. It doesn't imply the kind of the fact that the latency of the loop isn't implied here. The loop could take a day, right? Like that is still a continuous process. It's just not a batch process. I think the core here is that this is not a batch process, and the best way of describing that is through continuous. And I don't know whether, like, the word is just a word. I'm not, but like we need to be, I think one thing that we need to capture somehow is that this is not a batch process. This is a loop that continuously checks the state versus the desired state. That's how you would describe it if you were speaking voice, right? Viva voce. You describe it like that. Yeah, so I don't know whether the generally understood meaning of the phrase as it stands actually excludes and implies what you think it implies, Moshe. I'm not convinced that's a general perception. I would not mind. I'm not attached to the word itself, but I would like to see a proposal of a rephrase that captures the essence of the idea without losing the clarity of the language here. I would be very happy with a proposal for a change.
Gentle time, Brees. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
Not just gentle. Okay. I think it would be good to continue to go in hands order. So Leonardo and then Moshe. Oh, you declined.
No, I was muted.
Oh, okay.
So just a very, very quick comment. I think it's important to have continuous. I think it is a continuous process. And being a continuous process, we're also kind of like working with industry standard terminology. So we have continuous integration, we have continuous delivery, we have continuous deployment, and we have continuous state reconciliation. So I think from that point of view, there is already a certain understanding in the ecosystem of what this would mean. And it represents a progression from existing terminology that uses the word continuous. So I would vote for continuous to remain, albeit perhaps not scientifically accurate to the molecular degree. Yeah, I yield.
So part of my concern with continuous is the industry's abuse of the term and the resulting fallout. And if you look at, for example, continuous integration, what most people think continuous integration and what was meant by the author of continuous integration is very different. So continuous integration isn't running a build continuously. Continuous integration is merging your feature branches into master continuously on a daily basis. And again, that pill got abused on continuous delivery. And continuous delivery doesn't mean I'm deploying all the time and continuously delivering my code into production. It means I'm in a continuous state of deliverability. And again, with continuous integration, it's not continuous integration. It's continuous integratability and continuous deliverability. And I think that abuse has caused so many problems. And if we jump on the continuous train again, we're just going to be explaining, no, we don't mean continuous like that a year or two down the line, and have to clarify this definition of continuous to mean, no, we don't actually mean that, we mean this. And I think that's kind of where the problem with continuous comes in. And in terms of a proposal for changing it, I think the principle of state reconciliation loops is a far better description of what we're trying to achieve. And it's a loop. And whether that loop happens in a second or that loop happens in a day, it's a loop. And that loop can speed up and it can speed down. And that loop in theory can stop, but it's a loop. It happens in a continuous cycle, but it doesn't happen. It's not a continuous application of that reconciliation. Now yield.
Okay, thanks, Moshe. So it is Christian, then Robert, then Cornelia. And remember, gentle time at 2 minutes for each person.
All right. Yeah, so sorry I jumped in quick. So I caught in the tail end of a lot of things. But my question actually is, are we, by removing continuous, does that open up the situation where people will be asking, why didn't you put in continuous? Like, so my concern being that, kind of going off of what Leo said, since it's a industry standard, albeit a wrong one. So I think I agree with the fact that the terminology may be wrong, but since we are, if we remove it, are we losing anything by removing it versus what we gain by adding it? So my concern is my question is actually what's the opportunity cost, right? So if we add it, we may be technically wrong, but we'll be with the industry, right? Even though it's maybe technically wrong. If we remove it, what's the loss there, right? Like what are we opening ourselves up to if we remove it? I guess this is an open question to anyone, or maybe something to think about. I don't expect an answer, but anyways, I yield my time.
Thanks, Christian. Robert.
Yeah, I just want to say that I disagree that the word continuous is wrong, because and I actually disagree that the word continuous mean instantly, because at least the way that we use it in my language and all the other languages that I know, there's nothing that links continuous with being instant. It means something that goes over time. It is a loop. So when you're using the word loop, you're actually more or less implying that it is continuous. Removing the word continuous, all right, sure. But then I would say that it would be the principle of state reconciliation, not putting anything other in there, not a different word for loop. I don't feel that word is wrong at all. And saying that something, quoting that what is defined as, definitions are, there's a lot of definitions. Look in different word books, you're going to get a couple of definitions for the same word. It might mean all the definitions, or it might be only one, depending on the context. In this case, I mean that this means something that will continuously happen, which is the attempt of doing state reconciliation. Doesn't mean instant in my mind, or any of the languages that I speak. That was it.
Okay, thank you. Cornelia.
Yep, and I'm going to pile on to the two former speakers. So first of all, I completely hear you, Moshe. But I would suggest that the problem with something like continuous delivery is that people are misinterpreting that term. So I have had many conversations when I've suggested continuous delivery, and they say, but I don't want every code change to go to production. And I say, you don't have to. And so they're misinterpreting what continuous delivery means. By the way, for me, the definition of continuous means it just means you're never done. So continuous to me equals you're never done. And so I have also, by the way, Moshe, I have a lot of empathy for the position that you're coming from, because I have myself been in your shoes where I've said, but that's not a totally accurate statement and we have to explain it. But I'm with Christian in that sometimes there's enough kind of groundswell behind a term that even if it's slightly inaccurate, you have to go with it. And that's the reality of marketing. And so I too, to sum it up, am in support of keeping the word continuous.
Okay, and I'm going to raise my hand as well. Thank you, Cornelia. I'm going to move to suggest that for this phase that we ask, I would like to ask you, Moshe, to think of how this can be best phrased. I could write something out right now, but I don't know if that would necessarily satisfy everyone. How that could be best phrased within the notes section. That is my proposal, given the spirit of these principles and what I've heard from most of the people most of the time. I'm not shutting down conversation. We can still do this as long as new points are made. But I believe, let me see, I just wanted, before I yield my time, I just want to say that this is now still written down as one of the examples under the notes section. It would need to be fleshed out. And I think that our time would be better served in fleshing that out in a way that is explained well, perhaps in its own short paragraph. So I'm going to now yield, and Moshe, then Brice.
So if we make an explicit acknowledgement that we don't mean continuous in this way, and we mean without it being instant, and we don't mean it instantly, then perhaps we can add that to the note and have a contradiction between the title and the notes based on the value add of a marketing component. But there we are kind of breaking rules of principles, which is don't contradict yourself. And I think, yeah, so I think we can take it back to the drawing board and add more notes and definitions, but ultimately we always going to be contradicting ourselves, because we're saying on the one hand we don't mean instantly, but actually the definition is instantly. So it's a contradiction. So if we add a note, we accept the contradiction that continuous might have a dictionary definition of instantly. We don't actually mean instantly. We mean that it happens forever. Like something like that more succinctly might be acceptable, but if we make that acknowledgement. I yield.
So two things. So number one, I think that the assumption, like the collective understanding of the word continuous, Moshe, does not include instantaneous. It doesn't. I don't think anybody here would hear continuous and assume instantaneous, and I don't think that the dictionary definition of that does support the instantaneous either. So I think that's definitely that is not included. Instantaneous is not included. And I think the notes that we will add will be very explicit about this, right? I want that point to be made explicitly in the notes. What I would suggest is actually that we explicitly publish the first draft with your dissenting, with like literally an explicit dissenting opinion about the word continuous. I wouldn't mind having that in our first draft, saying here's something, right? Here's a dissenting opinion about principle 3 in our first draft. I think that would be more than I'd be very happy to have that, and I think that would make great material to feed the notes as well. That's it.
Okay, I think we've definitely given a lot platform to this, and there is a section here in our notes. This is not very well written. I would recommend Moshe, since you are clearly the primary advocate of this dissenting position. Not that you couldn't convince others as well at times, but that you write, that you take a stab at writing something that you think would be fitting in terms of size and understandability in the notes section. For example, not an entire book on it, but something that would be probably a paragraph. That's my suggestion. We could discuss it in a PR.
Cool.
Cool. I also would like to, well, my 2 minutes thing isn't up yet, but I would also like to ask others to help. I believe not only, Brice, did you say that you and I had discussed for quite a while the break glass incident management exception to the principle, as well as the bootstrap exception. Those might be two that you could potentially work on. I know we've already done it in longer form in the PR, but perhaps work on in the short form, as I just mentioned for Moshe, something that would be acceptable in the notes.
Yep.
And then that could be discussed in the PR too. Well, with that, I believe, including dissent, that will be transparent. We have general consensus on these 4 principles. There is one more point of discussion, and that was not covered yet, and we have 7 minutes. I want to not take it to the last second. I like to give ourselves a minute or two at the end to discuss when our next meeting is. Or I know we know it's weekly now, but just to do a little housekeeping. So for the next 6 minutes, if anyone, and let me just look on the agenda to see if there's something else that was really pressing that someone added, and no one else did add. So I believe, Moshe, the floor is yours to start with the further principle.
Cool. So by governance through Git, like pull requests and merge blocking, branch protection are kind of implementations of that governance process. So whatever it's called in whatever system it is, but really the idea that you can't make a change without having any governance process in place, and whether that's a pull request, whether that's something else that isn't a pull request or a merge blocking test or whatever it is, you can't make that change without governance. And I think that's really is at the core for me, and without it, you don't really convey the intention of GitOps, and you don't really gain the full benefits that you would without it. And that's kind of just my 2 cents.
Okay, I'm going to raise my hand in lieu of anyone else while folks are ingesting that. I just put up the discussion item up here. Moshe, I do agree with you on so many things. I'm sorry that it seems like we're like somehow butting heads on these particular ones. I think personally that this is a good point that could be a note as well. As I noted here 2 weeks ago, I know you said you disagree, and we can have that discussion here and have other points of view. But just to be very clear on what my disagreement is, I think the principle, as stated already, the principle of immutable desired state versions already describes this in the one paragraph, or really one sentence, where it says desired state is stored in a way that supports versioning, immutability of versions, and retains a complete version history. From my point of view, since auditability is one of the benefits, and audit requirements are, excuse me, the audit requirements themselves, I believe, are an implementation detail that would vary by tool and by system. And so from my point of view, that could be an important intention to note in a note, but I don't think it's an additional principle personally, because it's so closely aligned with principle 2. But that is my point of view only. Okay, I believe Christian was next, and then Chris Sanders. Did I get that right?
I think so. So real quick. So I don't have. I still need to ingest it a little bit and read the GitHub issue more in depth. But I was kind of, my question was, how is this different? So I guess kind of what you were saying, Scott. I wanted to see how is this different than, you know, how it separates itself from the other principles, because I do believe like principle 1 and then I guess 4 would kind of cover this. So I'm trying to figure out. I'm still trying to ingest how it would be different. So that's just something that's not entirely clear. If we need a whole nother one, if other ones cover it. Although I agree with the general idea behind it, right? Like that, I think that's what separates, you know, GitOps from a lot of other practices out there, is the governance through Git, right, through those processes. So I need a clearer definition of, or I guess reason why we need another one. So that's, and I yield there.
Okay, thanks, Christian. So then Chris and then Moshe.
So I see this more falling under best practices. For core GitOps, I don't see that we've made any statement at all about what the CI pipeline looks like. You know, a person could literally make an edit to YAML files in their Git repo that's being tracked and just immediately merge it, and that would be fine. That's still GitOps, but it would not be a best practice, right? So I think this is a great best practice, that, and I think this is one of the good uses of this working group, is to lay out these best practices about what a CI pipeline should be doing, right? So.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Moshe and then Lothar.
So I think the fact that you have a version or an audit trail is one small factor of governance. And when I put on an auditor's hat and I look at a process and say, how did this change get into production? Like the fact that it got in and I can see who put it in and when they put it in is just one part of the equation. The other part is, what is the process and change control process and governance process of what can go in? How is that handled? And just having an audit trail doesn't cover that. Like you would not be able to use a GitOps process, if, for example, in a financial institution, without adding governance into it. And in fact, in any good environment, you need governance to say, we don't make changes to production unless we have validated those changes, even with a basic lint or even with a two-man rule, whatever those rules are and governance processes are. But I think doing GitOps without governance it's not a best practice. Like, for me, that's a core practice. And I yield.
Okay. Lothar and then Brees.
I'm with Chris. To me, the principles are the core, the absolute minimum core, and the condensed version of what GitOps is. And subsequently, GitOps enables a lot of things, like the governance that Moshi describes, like hands-off principles, etc., etc. Balancing between what is part of the core and what is enabled by those core principles, I'm leaning towards not putting it into the core principles, but as something that is enabled by those core principles. I yield.
Okay, thank you, Brice.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm literally writing this now. I think it's the difference between practice and principle, and I cannot, like, I would emphasize the point that governance, GRC, right? Governance, risk, and compliance is extremely important for any serious GitOps application, but it's very context dependent. It's not a universal thing. So, for example, if you're a 2-person startup team, yeah, you're going to operate using GitOps by committing straight to your master branch. If you're doing a personal project and you're operating some a small scale, I don't know, you've got a small scale server installation to water your plants or to monitor your greenhouse, right? Like that's it's becomes very acceptable to commit straight to master. So I think because governance is context dependent, it's not a universal principle. That said, I think governance should be addressed explicitly in kind of the output of this working group, right? Like that's so important that we can't just not mention anything about governance. I just don't know whether it should be principle. I can absolutely see that being kind of an additional piece of work on top of the principles, that we explicitly talk about A, best practices, and B, governance, and how the principles enable governance, risk, and compliance in an enterprise. That's it. I yield.
Okay, so for the moment, our method so far has been to say there's a one line. In the spirit of keeping these as condensed as possible and as unrepetitive as possible, there's a one line, there's a one paragraph, and then there is notes below, which can be, we haven't limited them at this point. We haven't had the need to do that yet. I would recommend starting there, unless there is going to be brought wider consensus that we need another principle, that we begin by adding that there. Moshe, would you object to me making that note in the notes section for the moment, or would you like me to just leave this as a proposal for number 5, and we just kind of keep that as it is?
So I think we can just discuss it in more detail in the next meeting. Yeah, like for me, either or doesn't really make a difference. So at least we can have a deeper discussion around it next week.
Okay. Well, the reason that I'm asking is we are 4 minutes over, but I as moderator, I allowed it because we have consensus on 4 principles. We do not have consensus on further principles. We in fact have had dissensus so far about that, at least in this call, but that doesn't mean that further principles couldn't be added. I move to make a pre-release. Again, we are not writing a scientific paper, nor are we building a heart monitor. We have a goal, and we've had a stated goal since last November to publish a version of what we were then calling manifesto, we're now calling principles, by a little while ago. We have had broad consensus on these. The discussion has helped to clarify and refine them, but I move to make a first pre-release version of these principles published by the GitOps Working Group. They're the refined principles. As we all know, there have been principles out since 2018, I believe. So these are the refined principles by the GitOps Working Group, a pre-release. That is my motion. I would like to see if we can have consensus on, if we can reach consensus, and if we need to vote.
So I'm happy that we released 4 principles with that instant explanation in the notes. As
Okay.
long as we include that I'm happy, and then principle 5 comes as a continuation.
Okay, great. So in that case, the steps that Brice and I said we would do initially, we're going to bring the Git history from all of the Git history from that pull request. We're going to bring that into a new pull request. The idea was we're going to do that in a new repo under the Open GitOps project and strip out everything that was contentious so far, or not contentious, sorry, everything that did not reach broad consensus. And what we've agreed to now to start for the first, the first pre-release version, that we as the principals committee will all sign off on this. Again, as you said, I still have to make this because this is a condition. As you said, Moshe, with the distance, the note that that's important. And the co-authorship will be everyone who's participated in these principals committees meetings. And we can, before that's merged, have any final say. Before that's merged, we'll have a process and get that first pre-release version out.
Are you going to put together the PR for it, Scott?
Yes, I will.
That sounds awesome. Yeah.
With the history, so that it's not from me, it's from everyone.
No, sounds awesome.
Okay, is there any strong disagreement to that before we end this meeting?
Sounds very easy and straightforward to me. I'll just approve whenever you do the thing.
Great. Sounds great. Okay, so we'll do that, and we'll make this clear in the mailing lists that this pull request is out to give everyone a chance. We will broadly publicize this, and then we will get a version out there so folks can think that the GitOps working group is actually doing something. So thank you so much. You've all been wonderful. And I personally, just so you know, really appreciate all the conversation and the points that are brought up, because this will expand. I also see a book coming.
There's 4 books at least.
All right.
Thank you all. I'll see you next week, and I'll see you in the meantime on Slack and GitHub.
Thank you, Scott, for the great moderation again. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.